China is facing an unprecedented wave of rejection on the global stage. From trade partners to multinational corporations, the world is increasingly turning its back on Chinese goods and investments. The evidence is everywhere in Mexico, where nearly 900 containers of Chinese products were left to rot at the docks. Customs officers declared the majority counterfeit or illegally declared. What should have symbolized the power of China's export machine instead became a graveyard of abandoned cargo. But the backlash is not confined to foreign ports. Inside China itself, confidence is unraveling just as quickly. In mid-August, the shock announcement from Singapore's semiconductor giant ASMPT that it would close its Shenzhen factory and lay off almost 10,000 workers underscored a deeper truth. It is no longer just global regulators rejecting Chinese goods. It is also global investors beginning to reject China itself. The storm at Mexico's Pacific Gateway. Why abandoned containers are reshaping global trade. On Mexico's Pacific coast lies the port of Manzanillo, a massive industrial gateway handling close to 40% of the nation's foreign trade. It is not only Mexico's busiest port, but also a vital artery linking Latin America to Asian manufacturing supply chains. Yet in the summer of 2025, this hub became the center of a crisis that stunned traders, shipping companies, and policymakers alike. By June, customs officers were staring at rows upon rows of stranded containers, nearly 900 of them. Each one had been shipped from China filled with goods destined for Mexican markets. Yet instead of being collected, they were simply left to rot on the docks. Compared with the previous year, the scale of abandonment represented a spike of over 300%. The verdict from inspections was brutal. The majority of shipments were flagged as counterfeit or pirated merchandise. Perfumes, cosmetics, sneakers, handbags, industrial tools, tires, even textiles, all suspected of being fake or improperly declared. What should have been a symbol of trade vitality had transformed into a graveyard of seized cargo. A personal tragedy behind the numbers. For exporters, these were not abstract statistics. One trader recounted how his friend called in distress. He had a container among those stranded. Goods worth roughly 400,000 yuan combined with 30,000 in shipping costs had evaporated overnight. His voice trembled as he explained years of savings workers' overtime wages and family hopes had all been tied to that single shipment. When multiplied across 900 containers, the total value of losses approached 360 million yuan. For certain industries such as hardware or faucet manufacturing, even a single 20-foot container could represent over 1 million yuan in assets. What sat idle in Manzanillo was not just cargo. It was the accumulated labor of factories, the trust of international clients, and the future of families across provinces in China. Each day, those containers remained uncollected storage fees, mounted, compounding the disaster. And yet many importers concluded it was cheaper to abandon the goods entirely than to fight fines, legal battles, or confiscation. At first glance, it seems irrational that businesses would sacrifice entire shipments. But customs experts explained that once merchandise is deemed counterfeit, the potential penalties often outweigh the value of the cargo itself. A single fine can nullify an entire shipment's worth, leaving companies with no option but to let it go. Investigations uncovered systemic irregularities. Bills of lading often failed to match the actual contents. Packing lists were riddled with discrepancies. In some cases, overseas agents deliberately filed false declarations, hoping to slip goods through with reduced tariffs. Once uncovered, however, the punishment was severe. Industry insiders described the phenomenon as damage control abandonment. Faced with escalating storage costs, possible lawsuits, and long-term blacklisting, importers strategically abandoned containers to limit broader exposure. Mexico's counteroffensive. Recognizing the scale of illicit inflows, Mexico's National Customs Agency, ANAM, has intensified its crackdown. Officials have deployed advanced technologies at Manzanillo gamma-ray scanners, X-ray systems, multi-layer inspection networks, chemical analysis teams, and trained sniffer dogs. Containers flagged as suspicious are unpacked in full, with every item checked for compliance. Deputy Director Luis Angel Martinez Cabrera explained that abandonment surged not due to inefficiency, but because anti-smuggling enforcement became stricter and disputes over tariff classifications more frequent. While abandoned shipments did not reduce tariff collection directly, they clogged inspection areas and slowed throughput dramatically. Martinez emphasized that Mexico's customs system is particularly complex compared with Europe or the United States, for 4 reasons. Seizure upon complaint. If a brand owner files a rights violation report, detention is nearly automatic. Severe penalties without license. Any branded product lacking documentation can be detained, fined, and confiscated. The OEM trap. Even legitimate original equipment manufacturing goods may be seized if authorization papers are absent. Collective liability. In shared containers, if one item is suspected, the entire container is subject to seizure-amplifying losses. A broader pattern. Global enforcement. The Manzanillo crisis is only part of a wider storm brewing against counterfeit trade. Since early 2025, Mexican authorities have staged sweeping anti-smuggling operations. In March, a raid in Mexico City targeted 33 containers of illicit Chinese imports, ranging from electric scooters and motorcycles to office chairs and toys worth more than 300 million pesos, around 16 million US dollars. Beyond Mexico, the European Union also escalated its fight. On June 26th, the European Public Prosecutor's Office (EPPO) launched Operation Calypso, a coordinated sweep across 14 EU countries. The results were staggering: 480 containers seized, 101 premises searched, and millions of euros in cash and cryptocurrency confiscated. Targets included customs brokers, companies tied to organized crime tax advisors, law firms, and logistics operators. Goods seized ranged from textiles and footwear to electric bikes and scooters. Authorities described the raids as unprecedented in scale, mobilizing more than 200 officers in Greece alone. A network uncovered investigators revealed that the smuggling network was largely coordinated by Chinese nationals. The syndicate controlled every link of the chain, shipping goods from China, distributing them across Europe, laundering profits through shell companies, and funneling revenues back to Asia. In Greece, corruption reached alarming levels. More than 30 individuals, including dock workers and customs officials, were implicated, revealing how deep the infiltration had become. The port of Piraeus, majority owned by China's state shipping giant COSCO since 2016, had processed record throughput numbers. Yet behind the statistics lay a thriving gray market. One striking detail was the emergence of a female leader nicknamed Kelly, who allegedly served as the group's coordinator. Fluent in multiple languages, she acted as translator, negotiator, and strategist. Her rumored links to tobacco smuggling suggested deep experience in transnational crime. Tricks of the trade. How did the scheme operate? Authorities found systematic methods. False valuations. E-scooters worth $500 declared as only $100. Layered subcontracting. Goods passed through 5 or 6 shell firms to obscure their origin. Document manipulation. Invoices altered at every stage. Money laundering. Illicit gains disguised as legitimate through inflated invoices and circular trade flows. The scale of fraud was immense. EPPO estimated losses of nearly $700 million to the EU, with tax evasion on e-bikes and scooters alone exceeding $250 million in the first quarter of 2025. The crushing cost for exporters. For small and medium exporters in China, the fallout has been catastrophic. Over 60% of the impounded 480 containers in Europe belong to mid-sized forwarders, implicating more than 300 companies from Guangdong and Zhejiang provinces. Daily storage fees soared to over $10,000 per container, pushing firms to the brink of bankruptcy. A textile exporter lamented, "If this goes on for another week, I'll be ruined." Logistics companies calculated that clearance times in the EU have stretched from 3 days to 15, while freight costs surged 30%. What is unfolding is not just a crackdown, it is a global realignment of trade enforcement. For years, Beijing fueled exports by flooding markets with low-cost goods, often facilitated by undervalued invoices, counterfeit branding, and tax evasion. But 2025 marked a turning point. Mexico, defending domestic manufacturers and fiscal revenues, is fortifying its customs regime. The EU, alarmed by both economic distortions and geopolitical risks, is implementing coordinated inspections, GPS tracking of shipments, and new compliance requirements. Even e-commerce platforms in the Netherlands have begun rejecting goods unless accompanied by original invoices and verified logistic trails. Greek ports now demand triple-layer checks and mandatory openings of containers once cleared in 2 to 3 days, now extended to 2 weeks. What unfolded in Mexico was not just a border issue, it was a mirror reflecting the vulnerabilities of China's export model. Containers abandoned on foreign docks, counterfeit scandals, and mounting international scrutiny revealed how fragile Beijing's trade machine had become under global pressure. Yet the crisis did not stop at ports or customs warehouses. Even inside China's own industrial heartlands, the same currents of mistrust and rising costs were pushing global giants to make radical choices. Only weeks after Mexico's customs showdown made headlines, another shock reverberated across the global economy. This time, the stage was Shenzhen, long celebrated as China's Silicon Valley. There, a Singapore-based semiconductor titan, ASMPT, announced it was shuttering its entire factory, leaving nearly 10,000 workers jobless in just 3 days. If Manzanillo showed the world how Chinese goods were being rejected abroad, Shenzhen demonstrated how foreign capital itself was beginning to reject China. Singapore's ASMPT exit from Shenzhen. What the shock closure reveals about China's economy, a sudden shock in Shenzhen. In mid-August 2025, the global semiconductor industry was shaken by unexpected news. Advanced Semiconductor Materials Packaging Technologies, ASMPT, a Singapore-based multinational and one of the world's most influential suppliers of semiconductor packaging and testing equipment, announced that it would liquidate its wholly owned Shenzhen subsidiary. The closure was abrupt. Within 72 hours of the announcement, the gates of the Bao'an district factory were shuttered, and nearly 10,000 workers found themselves abruptly unemployed. The speed of the decision stunned employees and observers alike. For a facility that had only been in operation for 6 years and was widely viewed as profitable, the move signaled something far larger than an isolated corporate restructuring. To many, it underscored the fragility of China's investment climate and the growing unease among foreign businesses operating in the country. Workers left in limbo. The day following ASMPT's announcement, hundreds of workers assembled outside the factory compound and in nearby meeting halls. Videos circulated online showed groups of frustrated employees demanding answers from local union representatives. Why are our contracts being terminated? What mistake did we make? One worker asked, his voice echoing with both confusion and anger. The union's response was perfunctory. The company is shutting down as part of normal operations. No clear legal justification was offered. This only deepened the mistrust among employees, many of whom feared that compensation would be inadequate or delayed. For workers who had built their lives around steady employment in Shenzhen's manufacturing hub, the closure was not simply a corporate matter, it was a personal catastrophe. Families dependent on overtime wages now faced uncertainty, while migrant laborers risked being stranded without the means to return home. Financials versus reality. What made the shutdown especially puzzling was ASMPT's financial standing. Reports indicated that by the end of 2024, The company expected to post net income of roughly 20 million yuan with net assets of over 400 million yuan. On paper, this was not a company in crisis. Yet the restructuring bill itself would reach 360 million yuan, covering severance pay, outstanding leases, and closure expenses. The official explanation was framed as global optimization. ASMPT announced that it intended to reallocate resources to Singapore, Germany, and Huzhou, citing the need to streamline capacity and strengthen supply chain resilience. In other words, China was no longer central to its growth strategy. Rising costs and policy pressures. For many analysts, the reasoning was clear. Shenzhen, once hailed as China's Silicon Valley, has become an expensive and politically complicated place to do business. Labor costs are significantly higher than in neighboring regions such as Huzhou. Salaries can be 20 to 30% greater, while factory rents are double or even triple those found in surrounding cities. On top of these structural costs lies a heavy policy burden. Since the late 2010s, Beijing has enforced a strict social insurance mandate requiring companies to pay full contributions for all employees. For foreign enterprises already operating on tight margins, this additional expense has become a major deterrent. According to Leo, a former volunteer at the Shenzhen Labor Service Center, almost every day in Guangdong, we see factories either downsizing or closing entirely. It's not just about losses, it's about confidence. Many companies no longer trust the stability of the Chinese market, so they are leaving while they still can. A pattern beyond. One factory. ASMPT's retreat did not occur in isolation. Throughout the summer of 2025, a series of closures rippled across Guangdong province. Private manufacturers and foreign-owned plants alike have been shutting doors, leaving entire workforces in limbo. The common denominator has been a combination of rising costs, regulatory uncertainty, and declining domestic demand. Chen, a veteran of Guangdong's foreign trade sector with 2 decades of experience, described the situation bluntly. Foreign companies are under enormous pressure from policy and costs. Workers are suddenly dismissed without warning. The government remains silent. In the end, both enterprises and employees are victims of the system. This sentiment is echoed by scholars. A retired professor from the University of Science and Technology of China argued that the Communist Party's policies have diverged dramatically from market-oriented principles. Multinational corporations can simply move operations elsewhere, he said. But Chinese private firms have no such exit strategy. They are trapped. Industry-wide warning signals. Analysts within the semiconductor industry interpret ASMPT's withdrawal as more than a financial calculation. With a 38% market share in China, ASMPT was a critical supplier to chip manufacturing and packaging facilities nationwide. The company's exit leaves a gaping hole in the supply chain and sends a powerful warning to the industry. Chen, a semiconductor analyst based in Jiangsu, summarized the concern. ASMPT's shutdown shows that conditions have become intolerable even for profitable enterprises. Private firms are already struggling. The message is that policy risks now outweigh business opportunities. Singapore's role as investor. The Shenzhen closure also redirected attention to Singapore's unique relationship with China. Few outside financial circles realize that Singapore, not the United States, Japan, or the European Union, has been China's largest source of foreign investment for more than a decade. Since 2013, Singaporean capital has flowed steadily into China, overtaking Japan in 2022 to become the top cumulative investor. Iconic projects across China have Singaporean origins. Raffles city complexes developed by CapitaLand dominate skylines in Shanghai, Beijing, Ningbo, Hangzhou, and Suzhou. Wilmar International, headquartered in Singapore, holds nearly 40% of China's edible oil market through its Golden Dragonfish brand. The Shangri-La hotel chain, widely seen as a local luxury brand, is in fact another Singaporean export. Temasek Holdings. The sovereign wealth fund of Singapore has invested in giants like Alibaba, Tencent, and ICBC. Even Trafigura, one of the world's largest commodity traders and a key supplier of copper, zinc, and lead to China, operates from Singapore. In the semiconductor space, Singapore's role is equally strategic. Between 2018 and 2024, exports of semiconductor equipment from Singapore to China surged by 345%, surpassing the United States as a supplier. This makes ASMPT's exit particularly symbolic, a Singaporean giant choosing to pull out of China despite being one of the largest beneficiaries of that bilateral trade. Global politics and the semiconductor battlefield. Underlying the economic factors is an unavoidable geopolitical context. Since the United States began restricting high-tech exports to China, semiconductor supply chains have become a battlefield of international rivalry. Singapore, sitting between Washington and Beijing, has been under mounting pressure to choose sides. Earlier this year, Singaporean authorities prosecuted 3 men, including 2 citizens and 1 Chinese national, for illegally selling high-end NVIDIA AI chips to China. The government stressed that it would not tolerate smuggling, tax evasion, or false declarations. To analysts, this was a clear indication that Singapore cannot jeopardize its strategic ties with Western nations for the sake of uncertain gains in China. In this environment, ASMPT's decision looks less like an isolated restructuring and more like a calculated move to align with global currents. By consolidating operations in Singapore and Germany, both aligned with Western trade rules, the company is effectively hedging against future political risk, the Taiwan factor, and regional security. Singapore's delicate role in the region was further highlighted during a recent military simulation exercise. Conducted in early 2025, the exercise envisioned a scenario in which China imposes a naval and air blockade around Taiwan. Southeast Asian nations were tasked with evacuating their citizens stranded on the island. The conclusion was startling. Singapore's airlift capacity was deemed essential for any successful evacuation. This realization added a new layer of significance to Singapore's balancing act. Should a real Taiwan Strait crisis unfold, the city-state's decisions could carry enormous weight in determining regional security outcomes. For foreign investors, the implication is clear. China is not just an economic risk, but also a geopolitical flashpoint. Voices of dissent against Beijing. The shifting sentiment is also evident among Singapore's political elite. Ho Ching, wife of former Prime Minister Lee Hsien Loong, and the influential figure behind Temasek's investment strategy, caused a stir earlier this year when she described Xi Jinping as acting like a gangster boss. The comment shocked observers because of Ho's traditionally close ties with Chinese leadership. Yet it also served as a candid reflection of how confidence in China's political and economic stability is waning among even its closest partners. Her remarks are widely interpreted as a sign that Temasek may scale back or even fully withdraw from Chinese markets in the coming years. If that happens, the ripple effects could extend far beyond investment portfolios, signaling to the world that even long-term allies no longer trust Beijing's trajectory. A harbinger of broader retreat. ASMPT's sudden closure in Shenzhen is not simply a story about one company. It is a prism through which to view China's deteriorating business climate, rising costs, regulatory burdens, and geopolitical entanglements. For the nearly 10,000 workers left unemployed overnight, it is a personal tragedy. For foreign enterprises weighing their options, it is a cautionary tale. The larger message is stark: profitability no longer guarantees security in China. Policy unpredictability combined with external political pressures is driving even successful firms to retreat. While multinational companies can shift operations elsewhere, China's domestic private enterprises face a far bleaker reality, hemmed in by policies and unable to relocate. In the high-stakes world of semiconductors, where global supply chains intersect with superpower rivalries, ASMPT's withdrawal may be only the beginning of a wider exodus. Unless Beijing reforms its policies and restores business confidence, the flight of foreign capital and expertise will accelerate, leaving China more isolated, just as its ambitions for technological self-sufficiency reach their peak. reach their peak.